In a quiet cafe, District Attorney Michael Johnson was mistaken for a suspicious black man by two police officers who abused their authority and publicly humiliated him. Unbeknownst to them, they were targeting a man who upholds the law and would soon dismantle their careers, exposing a biased system. The impact of their actions would shake the very foundation of justice. Michael Johnson, a seasoned district attorney with a solid 10 years in the field, was the kind of man who commanded quiet respect. He stood tall, with a strong athletic build and an expressive gaze that seemed to take in everything around him. His face, though youthful at 35, bore the subtle lines of someone who had seen much and handled it with resilience. There was a calm, almost unshakable quality about him, tempered by years spent navigating the legal system and handling high-stakes cases. His skin was a warm, rich brown, his hair kept short and neatly styled, and a faint shadow of stubble added a sense of gravity and experience to his appearance. Michael was dressed simply, but impeccably, a dark, tailored suit that fit him perfectly, enhancing his quiet authority without drawing unnecessary attention. Over the suit, he wore a dark jacket, adding a casual touch, and he had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes to help him stay under the radar. He was there to unwind, hoping for a moment of peace at the end of a demanding day. As he held his coffee, the steam rising from the cup, his steady hands and observant gaze made him appear both deeply focused and subtly relaxed, as though he were gathering his thoughts. The calm atmosphere shifted abruptly when two police officers entered the cafe. Their loud voices and pointed glances immediately set Michael on edge, disrupting his quiet moment. As they looked his way, he couldn't help but notice their expressions, a mix of suspicion and contempt. Without hesitation, they began taunting him, their comments harsh and filled with an undertone of mockery. Though irritation flickered within him, Michael kept his emotions in check, not allowing any sign of discomfort to show. His years in the justice system had trained him to remain composed even in tense moments, and he had no desire to escalate the situation. All he wanted was to be left in peace, hoping that if he ignored them, they would lose interest and move on. However, it quickly became clear that ignoring them wasn't going to work. Officer Jackson, a tall, broad-shouldered man with an arrogant smirk, approached him directly. Standing just a little too close, Jackson demanded to see Michael's ID, his tone laced with a sense of superiority. The other officer hung back, watching Michael with a scrutinizing gaze, as if waiting for him to make a wrong move. Michael's expression remained neutral, but a subtle tension grew in his eyes. He sensed that this wasn't just a routine check. It felt more like a power play, an unspoken assertion of authority over him, laced with a hint of barely concealed hostility. Finally, as the officer's questions grew more pointed and overtly antagonistic, Michael decided he'd had enough. He looked Jackson in the eye, his voice calm yet firm as he asked, "Am I a suspect or a criminal?" The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions mocking as they responded with an even harsher demand for his identification. As Michael handed over his ID, maintaining a calm exterior, his face betrayed a hint of confusion, mixed with irritation. He had grown accustomed to facing adversity, but hadn't anticipated this outright disrespect. The officers took his ID with feigned interest, barely glancing at it before exchanging looks, as though they'd found an excuse to escalate the situation. One of them, smirking, suggested that Michael looked suspiciously like a suspect in a recent case. The other officer chimed in, claiming Michael showed all the signs of the supposed criminal. Amused by their own theatrics, they saw an opportunity to exploit their authority further, almost as if for sport. Michael attempted to explain his position, trying to keep the situation from spiraling, calmly telling them that he was, in fact, the district attorney. But his words were met with disdain. They dismissively laughed, waving off his explanations as though they were just part of his act. Ignoring his protests entirely, one officer roughly pulled out a pair of handcuffs and snapped them onto Michael's wrists with a calculated lack of care. making each click of the metal seem more painful than the last. The restraints dug into his skin, and every slight movement added to the discomfort, a feeling he hadn't expected to experience on this side of the law. The officer stood over him, judgmental stares fixed firmly on his lowered frame. They seemed to view him as guilty already, as though they had silently decided his worth, without the slightest thought of who he truly was or the rights he was entitled to. Around them, the cafe patrons looked on in shock, whispering among themselves, their expressions a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and growing outrage. Several customers reached for their phones, recording the scene as they witnessed the unprovoked humiliation of a respected official. The officers, however, found the kind of satisfaction in their power display. They exchanged smirks, laughing at the situation they had created, completely assured that they were in control and that no one present could challenge them. The scene unfolded with a troubling sense of public degradation, where the authority they wielded had become tainted by prejudice, and their show of power had taken on a sinister tone. Yet, not everyone remained silent. One cafe employee, familiar with Michael as a regular and respectful customer, watched the scene with a growing sense of alarm. Recognizing that something was deeply wrong, he quietly slipped into the back, taking care not to draw attention, and made a discreet call to the district attorney's office to report the incident. Within minutes, word spread, and Michael's colleagues, friends, and even a few lawyers who knew him began to arrive at the cafe. The officers were so engrossed in their act that they failed to notice as the room quietly filled with legal professionals, each observing the scene with mounting anger. Slowly, the officers' confidence began to waver. One by one, the lawyers stepped forward, presenting their IDs, demanding explanations, and pressing for the immediate removal of the handcuffs. What had started as a humiliating spectacle turned into a situation the officers could no longer control. Their smug smiles faded, replaced by an anxious awareness of the gravity of their mistake. It was only now, surrounded by a crowd of attorneys and officials, that the officers began to realize they had committed a serious error that could end their careers. As district attorney staff flooded into the cafe, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The officers, seeing familiar faces among the lawyers and Michael's colleagues, paled. Their confidence evaporated as they stumbled to explain that it had been a mistake and that they were just doing their job. But Michael, who had remained silent until then, stood up with a cold resolve. He looked directly into the officers' eyes, his gaze unyielding and stern, as if passing judgment not only on them, but on everything they represented. Silence fell, and everyone waited for him to speak. "You abused your authority, acted on racial stereotypes, and humiliated an innocent man without cause." His voice boomed like thunder, firm and clear. "This isn't just a mistake, it's a crime against justice and human dignity." He paused, letting each word sink in with the officers and everyone present. His voice didn't need to be loud. His authority and conviction spoke for him. The officers stood with bowed heads, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and shame. They seemed, perhaps for the first time, to understand the full weight of their actions, and that their positions would not shield them from consequences. "I am not just a citizen you decided to humiliate," Michael continued, his voice calm but deeply wounded. "I am someone who defends the law every day, who fights for justice, and you, who are supposed to uphold order, became tools of prejudice and humiliation." After his words, the officers' faces went completely white. They realized their actions would not go unpunished. The cafe incident quickly attracted public attention. Videos taken by witnesses, capturing the moment of the district attorney's humiliating arrest, spread across social media, sparking a storm of outrage and debate. Each view and comment under the videos increased the pressure on the police and city administration. People were appalled by the officers' blatant bias and abuse of power. Despite the humiliation, Michael Johnson chose not to let the incident go unpunished. He initiated an internal investigation, personally overseeing every phase of the case. This was more than a matter of personal justice. It became a symbol of his fight against the systemic discrimination embedded in law enforcement, He understood that this incident was just the tip of the iceberg, and that behind every such episode lay countless others, unnoticed and unresolved. When the truth came out, the officers who had humiliated and mocked him faced well-deserved consequences. They were stripped of their positions and later required to issue a public apology. It was no easy task for them, and they understood that they would never return to the force. For many, this served as a warning that the days of unchecked power abuse were over. For Michael, this case was a personal victory and a crucial step in his mission to root out prejudice from the justice system. Now, his name was linked not only to the cases he handled, but also as a symbol of the fight for equality and justice,